Well, welcome to the last lesson of this course. As I was going through the planning stages, I thought it would be nice to end this course by talking about debugging. Debugging has nothing to do with the C# language, but it has everything to do with development and the development tools that you use. Visual Studio is very nice in that the debugger is built in. Now, in today's day and age, most tools have a built-in debugger, but it used not to be that way. You might have had to load an external program to debug your code and debug the programs that you've used, but with Visual Studio, it's always been built in. And debugging is important because while we sometimes do write bug-free and stable code, there's also times when we write bug-ridden code. And it could be just small little bugs that appear just 1% of the time, but when they do, it just throws our calculations off, and we want things to be perfect. And a debugger allows us to find those issues and fix them because we can execute a program line by line if we want to. But we don't have to do that. We can start at any particular point within our code and debug from there on until we find our bug. So today we are going to look at some of the debugging features within Visual Studio and really introduce you to debugging if you haven't ever used a debugger before. And to do this, I've written some code already just so that you wouldn't have to see me write it. And so let's go over this code first, and then we will start to get into the debugging aspect of it. Well, I wrote a method called writeTimesTable. It accepts a multiplier, and we essentially loop 1 through 12, multiplying the value of I times whatever was passed to the method. So we would have like 1 times 2, 2 times 2, 3 times 2, 4 times 2, and so on and so forth if we passed 2 to the method. Now, there is something that we haven't seen before, and this is really something I wanted to talk about whenever we were discussing strings, but I just never really found a way to fit it in. This is the string.format method, and it allows us to specify kind of a base string with little data points. You can see the data points with the brackets and 0, brackets and 1, and then brackets and 2, and then we can provide values that are going to be plugged into each of these data points. So whenever this string.format executes, it's going to take this bracket 0 and replace it with whatever is specified with this parameter. So the first parameter is the string that we want to build. And then after that are all the values that we want to plug into the string. So the first parameter after the string is 0. So whatever is here is going to go into 0. Whatever is specified here, which is the multiplier, is going to be put in place of this data point here. And then the result of this multiplication operation is going to go with this second data point here, or this third data point here. So if we were to run this, let's go ahead and call this writeTimesTable. We'll pass 2, and we'll see the result. 1 times 2 equals 2, 2 times 2 equals 4, and so on and so forth. So the string.format allowed us to build our base string, if you will, and then supply the values to plug into each of these little points. So this is the method that we are going to debug, and there's really nothing out of the ordinary here. There's no bug. As you can see, we're getting all of the correct values. At least I think we are. Yes, we are. We're getting all of the same values. So there's no bug to fix. But I at least want you to see how we go through the debugging process. And the first thing we need to do is set what's called a breakpoint. And a breakpoint is going to stop code execution wherever we put the breakpoint. So if we want to put a breakpoint on line 14, whenever we execute this application, the code or the code execution is going to stop at line 14, and it's going to wait for us because we have a breakpoint. We are breaking out of code execution, and the debugger is waiting for us to do something. To set a breakpoint, you just click over here in the gray area of the code editor. I usually call this the gutter. But you just simply go to whatever statement that you want to break on, and click over there. Now notice I said statement. This isn't on a line basis, it's on a statement basis. So for example, line 21 and 22 are all the same statement. So since I set a breakpoint on line 21, the breakpoint is actually for the entire statement. And we can see that because lines 21 and 22 are highlighted. And if we try to set a breakpoint on 22, it's going to be put on 21 because that's where the statement begins. Now you can also set a breakpoint using the F9 key. And wherever you have your keyboard cursor, not your mouse cursor, but your keyboard cursor, that is where the breakpoint is going to be put. So I put the keyboard cursor on line 24. If I press F9, we put a breakpoint there. So let's run this, and we can't run this and debug by using Control F5. If I do that, our code is going to execute and we will never hit these breakpoints. So to debug our application, we have to press F5. That's going to run our application, and you could see that the console came up, but then we went right back to Visual Studio. And we can see that instead of red, this line is highlighted in yellow. This is where we currently are as far as code execution. And it's important to know that the write times table method has not executed yet. We set a breakpoint here on line 14, and code is sitting here waiting for us to do something, but this method has not executed yet. So we want to do what's called stepping, and we have different ways that we can step. We can step into a call, which is what we are going to do, and that steps into the call of write times table, or we can step over this call. So if we know that write times table is working fine, we can actually step over it to go to the next line. And in fact, let's go ahead and stop debugging. To do that, you can go up here and click on this little square, for stopping. So we can stop. And let's add another line of code after we call write times table. So let's write line, and let's say we're out of a write times table. So let's run this again. And we once again hit the breakpoint on line 14. So let's step into this method call. And we do that by either clicking up here in the toolbar. There's step into, step over, there's step out. We want to step into. Now I'm going to use the keystrokes because that's what I'm more familiar doing. And stepping into is F11. So by pressing that, we jump down to the write times table. So now we are inside of the write times table. If I press F11 again, we go to the for loop initialization. Now look down here within the locals. This is going to list all of the variables that are in or that we have access to inside of this write times table method. So right now we have access to multiplier. The value is 2, and we have access to I, which right now is 0. But after I press F11 again, whatever is highlighted is going to execute, and the value of I is going to change. So I'll press F11 again, and we can see that the value changed to 1. In fact, the color changed as well. And since it's red, we know that this recently changed. So now the condition is going to be evaluated, and we can see by mousing over, I is less than 13, and that is evaluating to true. So if we press F11 again, we go into the loop, and now we are going to build our string. Now notice, once again, in locals, multiplier is still 2. We have a new variable called string, and it's given a value of null, because we haven't assigned the value to string yet. We have just created the string object, and then I is 1. So after I press F11, it's going to execute the string format method and assign that value to the str variable, and we can see down in locals that we have a new value for string because it is red, and then it's going to write the line to the console. So by pressing F11 again, we go past that call down to the closing curly brace. If we look at our console, we can see that it did indeed write that string to the console. And if we hit F11 again, it's going to go to the increment portion of the loop, and it's going to increment I. And before I press F11 again, look down here at locals. The string that we created is gone because it is no longer within scope, because string only exists inside of the code block of the for loop. So whenever I press F11 again, I is going to change to 2. There we go. The condition is going to be evaluated again, and we can see IntelliSense is saying that that is true. So pressing F11 again, we create a string. The string variable is already created, but it's going to change. So there it goes. 2 times 2 is 4. Then we step again, write it to the console. There we go. And so on and so forth. So we can keep doing this all day long for as long as I is less than 13 and step through every statement. Now this can be a little tedious, especially through a loop, and especially through a loop with a lot of items to iterate over. But this is how we step into code and examine every line. So we're at the end. So let's do that again. And we know that write times table works fine now because we stepped through every line of code. We saw the values being created. We saw the string being created, and we saw it being written to the console. So we know everything works. We can step over the write times table method by going and clicking on this icon, step over, or pressing the F10 key. This is going to execute the write times table for us, and we don't have to step into it. So I'm going to press F10. And since we had a breakpoint on line 26, it executed all of the code up until this breakpoint. So since we did have a breakpoint, we did end up inside of write's timetable. But if we remove this breakpoint, and if we press F5, F5 is going to continue executing this code. So if we continue, it's going to finish out the code for us. So let's run that again because I forgot we had that breakpoint there. Let's run it again. We'll press F10 to step over this call. It's still going to call it, but step over. If we look at the console, we will see that it indeed went through that loop and wrote every string to the console. And now it's waiting for this line to execute to say that we are out of times table. So if we step over that call, go back to the console, we can see that it was written to the console. And then whenever we press step again, it doesn't matter if it's over or into, the code is going to finish. There's one other stepping function that I do need to mention. And let's go ahead and run this. And let's step into the write times table method. So I'm going to press F11 to get inside of the method. And I'm just going to step over a couple of times. No whammies, no whammies, stop. If you're too young to know what that is, that was from a game show that I watched whenever I was growing up. Press Your Luck is what it was called. So there you go. Let's say that after going through this method a few times, we've realized that write times table is fine. There's no bug whatsoever within this method, and we want to get out of it. Well, to do that, we use a function called stepping out. We can do so by pressing this icon, which is next to step over, but the keystroke is Shift F11. And what this will do, this will execute the rest of write times table and take us back to where we got into write times table. So first let's look at the console. We have gone through 1 through 6. Whenever I press Shift F11, it's going to execute the rest of that method. Go back. There we go. It executed the rest. And we are sitting back at where we called write times table. But right now, that method has already been called. So to get to the next statement on line 16, all we have to do is press F10 for step over or F11 for step into. It doesn't matter because this method has executed, and whatever stepping function we choose, it's going to take us to the next line. And there's also something else important to note. Let's get back into this and let's step into. The step out will work as long as we don't have a breakpoint set inside of this method. So if we set a breakpoint for the statement creating our string value, and if we try to step out, it's going to go right back to this breakpoint. and it's hard to demonstrate, but I'm pressing Shift F11 right now, and it's hitting the breakpoint again. So as long as we have a breakpoint inside of this method, we cannot step out of it. But the moment that we get rid of the breakpoint and press Shift F11, it's going to step us out of this method and back to where we called it. So that is stepping through code. It allows us to look at each line of code execute as we are debugging our code. But that's not all that there is to debugging. You can see that there are other little goodies down here. So let's stop debugging and let's start again. And the first thing we are going to look at is the watch. The watch is someplace that we can watch for certain variables or expressions. So for example, let's step into write times table. And let's get inside of the loop. If I wanted to look at a particular condition, like say I is less than 5, that is going to evaluate to true. So I can keep stepping through code if I wanted to, and then whenever I is not less than 5, you can see that it changed to false. So any type of value that we want to watch, be it a variable or an expression or a condition, we can do that with the watch portion of the debugger. The next little goodie is the call stack, and this is going to list all of the methods that have been called to the point of where we are within our code. For example, we started our application with the main method, and then whenever we called the write times table method, then the call stack shows write times table. So as long as we are in write times table, this is going to be the call stack. And if we had another method call that, by the way, it's a method that we write, it's not a method of the .NET framework because of how things are designed. So we won't actually see the call stack for the write line method. But for any other method that we would write, that we would call inside of write times table, that would be entered in above the write times table in the call stack. So it's kind of in descending order, going from the most recent to the most less recent as far as methods are concerned. The next is the immediate window, and this is like a console window. So if we wanted to evaluate some of the values of the variables or conditions or expressions, we could do that with this console window using any of the variables within our current scope. So for example, we have a watch of I is less than 5. We can type that into the console and get an immediate evaluation of that condition and the result of that condition. So if we just wanted to check it at one time, we can use the console to do that. Otherwise, we could do a watch to do that. But we can also use this to do something very special. We could do something like string equals I broke this. And that will set a new value for the str string. So whenever we execute this console.write line and look at it, we can see that we changed the value of that variable. So we do have that power while we are debugging. If we think that we found a bug and we want to change the value of something to make sure that that is a proper fix, then we can do that if we wanted to. So we can change values, we can look at values, we can do just about anything that we want with this immediate window. And that is debugging. Debugging is an extremely important part of development because that's where we can find and fix bugs. Without the ability to debug, we would have a hard time finding the bugs and fixing them. So whenever debuggers were created, it was a glorious day in the world of development. And that's going to end not only this lesson, but this course. I would like to thank you for spending a little bit of time with me each day to learn the C# language. I hope I gave you a good foundation so that you can start writing your own C# apps. I know I didn't give you a complete knowledge of C#, but everybody has to start someplace, and I hope I gave you enough to get started and write some pretty good apps. If you need to get a hold of me, if you have questions, feel free to contact me through Twitter or through the marketplace. I have an account on both. Both have the same name, JW McPeak. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. So once again, thanks, and I hope you enjoyed this course, and I hope you write some pretty awesome apps. So take care. I'll see you later.